Just moments ago, I'd saved his life, though I feared our safety would be short-lived. I had to come up with a plan before the monsters broke through. Had my family still been around, I wouldn't even have opened the door, but they were among the first victims, and I had nothing left to keep me alive. My first idea was to leave through the back door, but then we'd surely get caught in the act. I had to find a way to save the child, even if it was grunting menacingly and trying to lecture passerbyers on the demons of Halloween and that we were inviting devils into our home. I handed the girl, who oddly never held a bag, a few packets of candy. She giggled and thanked me, just like any other child. "Hey," I began, pointing at the now screaming Danforth. "I heard that man gives really good candy. You should go over there." "Really?" the girl gasped. If she had a face behind her mask, her eyes would have been wide. "That's awesome." I smiled and nodded. The girl wouldn't kill him. It would take more than a simple refusal to kill. At first, there were stages to the effects of the girl. I watched nervously, and the girl in the mask skipped over to my neighbor, an elderly woman who lovingly handed over 6 packets of candy. I'd heard she tried to follow the girl to wherever she came from many years ago, and since then was terrified of what she had seen. The girl thanked her loudly and finally skipped over to Danforth. It was as if the whole neighborhood other Danforth-like copies, who echoed, "Anything," he said. "We're gonna kill that menace," he shouted, blasting really, really annoying music as he went door to door, handing out flyers that told us not to feed her candy, claiming that we were giving the devil our souls. "She's going down," one of his like-minded copies echoed. "We're prepared this year," said the other, holding up not one, but 2 Bibles. "Sure," I murmured, slamming the door in their faces. By now, Danforth had heard the legend for himself. followed soon after until he exploded into hundreds of orange and black candy wrappers that drifted away under the gaze of the moon. And the little girl, happy as ever, skipped into the horizon. Now as I finish typing this up, I hear that familiar sound of a knock on the door and those perfectly timed words, "Trick or treat. Things are good now." Without Danforth, we all pay our dues to the girl in the mask, and not a single soul has been harmed since. So if you ever see a little girl in a mask that has no face, do give her some candy. She really does appreciate it. Oh man, that was interesting. Strangely wholesome in a way of a child just wanting candy, but strange in that her mask appears and that she almost like got excited about knowing that someone would be coming for her, that someone would like die. And then it said something that I thought was interesting. Where was it? Oh, that she follows them. So you were on vacation and then she just appears to at your hotel. That's strange. That makes me think like there's some like it's not like once you're in that community it's like attached to you in a way. Like I wonder if you were to move, would she follow you? Or she's only there if you live there. I don't know. That I thought was strange and creepy. I would be terrified. Oh my gosh. But yeah, that was good. Very imaginative. Okay, so I have one more here. Let's see. It's not too long. Alright, so let's start this last one here. This one is called I Don't Celebrate Halloween Anymore, and it is by Born Beach. Halloween, Halloween, Halloween. What a time of year, ain't it? I still remember my first Halloween. My first real Halloween, mind you. Not the manufactured stuff that they shovel down our throats year after year. I'm talking about All Hallows Eve. I'm talking about Samhain. 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 I'm talking about the one night of the year when monsters walk the earth. I was 11 years young when I first experienced was he doing dead, without his head, floating down the river when he should have been in bed? Was it a prank gone wrong? Maybe the poor kid slipped walking across the trestle. Or maybe, just maybe, somebody sick and twisted was out for blood, and innocent little Greggy was too